Have you ever sat by the phone wondering if maybe today would be the day they finally call? Not just a quick check-in or a text message, but a real conversation. How are you really doing, Mom? Or, Dad, I've been thinking about you. If so, you're not alone. So many parents, especially as we age, find themselves asking the same question. Why don't my kids reach out anymore? Some of us even try what feels like a smart move. We pull back. We stop calling, we stop texting, we give them space, thinking, if I ignore them long enough, maybe they'll realize they miss me. And when that silence is met with more silence, it hurts. It cuts deep. But here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud. Ignoring your adult children doesn't always make them come running. Sometimes it just confirms what they already felt, that the connection was never really there. In this video, we're going to talk about something difficult but necessary. Because too many good people are carrying around silent pain, wondering why their children seem distant, why calls have stopped, why holidays feel awkward, or why visits are short and infrequent. It's not because you weren't a good parent. It's not because you didn't try. But there are real reasons your kids may not be reaching out, and understanding them may be the first step toward healing. Let's start with the most painful one to hear. Your kids may never have felt truly connected to you in the first place. That's not easy to say, and it's even harder to hear. But sometimes the gap between a parent's love and a child's experience is wider than we think. You may have done your best, provided for them, given them shelter, even sacrificed your own happiness to raise them. But emotional connection isn't just about doing the right things. It's about how those things are felt. If, growing up, your child didn't feel emotionally safe, seen, or valued for who they were, not just what they did, they may carry that sense of distance into adulthood. It's not always about big, obvious issues. It can be subtle. Maybe you were busy working hard to keep the family afloat. Maybe affection didn't come easy in your household. Maybe they needed conversations or emotional support that you didn't know how to give. You loved them your way, but they didn't always feel it their way. And now, years later, that lack of emotional closeness has quietly become the new normal. No big fight, no angry words, just silence. And so when you stop calling, hoping they'll notice, sometimes they don't. Not because they don't care, but because they never felt truly close to begin with. That can be heartbreaking. But it can also be freeing, because once we see that the disconnect isn't a punishment, but a pattern, we can begin to shift it. Now here's where things get confusing. You may have heard that pulling away from someone will make them value you more. That silence creates mystery, and absence makes the heart grow fonder. And yes, in some relationships that's true. But here's the key. That only works when connection already exists. If your kids already feel close to you, if they feel emotionally safe and valued, then yes, a little distance might spark their concern. They might call to check on you. They might miss your voice, your presence, your care. But if that emotional bridge was never fully built, then your silence doesn't feel like a void. It feels like a relief. Not because they don't love you in their own way, but because they were never used to leaning on you emotionally in the first place. So before expecting a reaction, ask yourself gently, was there ever a strong foundation to begin with? Did we really talk, not just about chores or grades or rules, but about feelings, struggles, hopes? Did they know I was a safe place, or just the one keeping the house running? This isn't about blame, it's about insight. Because if the bond was never that deep, ignoring them now won't pull them back. It might just make the silence feel final. And then there's this. Maybe you're not the priority in their life anymore. That's not meant to sound harsh. Life changes, responsibilities grow, and sometimes, especially in this fast-paced world, Adult children put their energy where they feel the most seen and supported. It might be their spouse, their career, their own kids, or even their friends. You might still be important, but you're not urgent, not top of mind, not the person they instinctively turn to when they need comfort or advice. And that can sting, especially after all the years you spent putting them first. You changed diapers, wiped tears, stayed up at night worrying, and now they can go weeks without checking in. It feels unfair, but here's something to sit with. Being a parent is one of the few roles in life where the better you do your job, the less they need you later. You raise them to be independent, to stand on their own, to not need constant hand-holding. But the emotional closeness? That doesn't come from responsibility. It comes from shared experience, mutual respect, and the feeling of being wanted, not just obligated. So if your kids have created a new center of gravity in their lives, and you're not in it, it may be time to stop expecting to be their son and start finding your own light again. And while we're here, let's face another hard truth. Sometimes your kids are already turning to someone else for connection. It could be a spouse, a therapist, a mentor, or even a close friend. And while you might feel replaced, it's not always personal. It might just be that someone else gives them the emotional experience they wish they'd had with you. That person listens without judgment. That person remembers little things. That person offers comfort without fixing, presence without pressure. You may have hoped that one day, as adults, your kids would finally see you clearly, understand your sacrifices, appreciate your ways. But they're human too. And like all of us, they turn to the people who make them feel something, safe, valued, accepted. If you didn't offer that emotional experience, even if you gave them everything else, they may seek it elsewhere. That doesn't mean there's no hope, but it does mean you may not be their emotional home. And that's okay. Sometimes healing begins not with changing their mind, but with changing how we show up. Not to win them back, but to become someone they're naturally drawn to, not out of guilt, but because it feels good. We'll continue this conversation in a moment, but for now, take a breath. If any of this has struck a chord, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you care. And caring is the beginning of change, not for them, but for you. Because at this point in life, you deserve peace. You deserve honest connections. And you deserve to stop carrying the weight of wondering what went wrong and start focusing on what can go right from here. Now let's keep going. There's another reason your silence might be met with silence. You seem too replaceable. And again, I know that's not easy to hear. But think about it this way. In life, we naturally hold on tighter to what feels rare, meaningful, and irreplaceable. A cherished book, a lifelong friend, a voice we can't imagine losing. But if something, or someone, feels ordinary, predictable, or easy to substitute, we don't feel that urgency to hold on. For many parents, especially those of us who grew up in a time when duty often spoke louder than emotion, we were taught to provide, protect, and push through. We didn't always have the tools to be emotionally open or expressive. So we did what we could. We showed up, we paid the bills, we got dinner on the table. But sometimes, without realizing it, we became invisible. Not because we didn't matter, but because we didn't make ourselves matter in a way our kids could emotionally feel. Now they're grown. They have lives full of stimulation, relationships, support systems. And if you became someone who just sends generic texts or checks in with routine questions, they may have filed you away as just another person they'll get back to eventually. Not because they don't care, but because the connection doesn't feel essential. That's the word we need to understand here. Essential. So the question becomes, are you offering something essential in their emotional world? Or are you simply present in the background, easy to fade out? And I want to pause here to say something important. Being replaceable doesn't mean you are replaceable. But if you've spent years putting your needs, your voice, your joy on the back burner, for work, for family, for survival, it might be time to bring yourself back into your own life. When your kids see you light up with purpose again, when they hear energy in your voice, feel calm in your presence, or sense something new and grounded in how you carry yourself, that's when curiosity returns. Not because you begged for attention, not because you played a tactic, but because you became someone who radiates something they don't want to lose. Now let's talk about something many parents don't realize. Sometimes your silence doesn't look like strength, it looks like weakness. You may have pulled back to protect your heart. You may have stopped reaching out to preserve your pride, to send a message to see if they care enough to make the first move. But depending on the history between you, they might interpret that silence in a very different way. They might not see it as a mature boundary or a test of love. They might see it as you giving up, or worse, retreating, shutting down, backing away because you couldn't handle closeness, vulnerability, or rejection. And if they've ever seen you avoid hard conversations in the past or hold your feelings in, they may just assume this is more of the same. You see, emotional strength isn't always about holding back. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's not about silence, but sincerity. Saying, "I miss you even if I don't know how to fix this." Or, "I've realized I want us to be closer, even if we never were." That kind of honesty is rare. And rare things get remembered. Rare things shift people's hearts. So if you've pulled back, ask yourself, was it to create space? Or was it to protect yourself from disappointment? Because your kids can usually feel the difference, even if they don't say it out loud. This brings us to something deeper. One of the most surprising truths is that sometimes the reason your kids aren't reaching out is because you're still focusing all your energy on them. And I know that might seem backwards. Isn't that what being a parent is about? Caring, thinking about them, wanting to be part of their lives? Yes. But there's a line between care and fixation. And when our lives begin to revolve too much around people who've already stepped away, we lose something sacred: ourselves. Somewhere along the way, maybe you forgot that your life matters even without their constant involvement. That your purpose isn't measured by how often your phone rings, or who remembers your birthday, or how many visits you get each year. That your value doesn't come from being needed, it comes from being you. Too often, parents, especially those in their 60s, 70s, or beyond, tie their identity so tightly to their kids that when the connection fades, they feel invisible. But your children are not your life. They were part of your life. You are still here. You still get to wake up each day and decide who you want to be, what you want to pursue, who you want to love, and what kind of energy you want to bring into the world. And the beautiful, unexpected thing? When you start doing that, when you stop orbiting around your children and start living for yourself, you become more magnetic than ever. People, including your kids, are drawn to people who are alive. People who are curious. People who are exploring, growing, laughing, discovering. You don't need to chase anyone. You don't need to guilt anyone. You need to become the kind of person you'd want to reach out to. Calm, kind, content, grounded. So if you're sitting at home wondering, why haven't they called? Maybe shift the question to, what can I do today to feel more like myself again? Because the moment you stop trying to pull love from others and start pouring care into yourself, something beautiful happens. You stop waiting and you start living. And in that space, sometimes, when you least expect it, the call comes. The visit happens. The connection begins again. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped needing it to feel whole. And if it doesn't happen, if they still don't come around, then at least you're not putting your joy on pause anymore. At least you're building a life that's meaningful, even without applause. You deserve that. You deserve a life that's not built on waiting for someone else to remember you, but on remembering yourself. So now we arrive at one more truth that often goes unspoken, but it might just change everything. Sometimes your kids don't reach out simply because they never felt like you were the prize to begin with. And I don't mean that in a harsh or judgmental way, but in their eyes, you may not have been someone they looked up to, admired, or longed to reconnect with, especially if the emotional foundation was never fully built. This can be hard to process because for many years, you were the center of their universe. You fed them, held their hands through scraped knees and school tests, maybe even sacrificed your own dreams to give them more opportunity. But over time, love can turn into routine, routine into distance, and distance into something colder. Indifference. And the truth is, no matter how much you love your children, they are human too. They gravitate toward what lights them up, who makes them feel seen, and what feels worth their time. If you've become someone who simply waits in the background, without growth, without spark, without the energy that once made you magnetic, they may not feel that same pull to be around you anymore. But here's the good news. This isn't the end of the story. You can still become the kind of person they do want to reconnect with. Not through guilt, not through silence, but through transformation. When your children begin to see you not just as a parent, but as a person who is still growing, still learning, still becoming, that's when something changes. It doesn't happen overnight. But people are naturally drawn to those who evolve, who carry wisdom without bitterness, who move through pain and still make room for joy. So ask yourself, what kind of energy am I giving off? Am I showing my children that my best days are behind me, or that I'm still becoming someone worth knowing? Because when they see that their parent is still alive with purpose, still glowing with grace, it shifts something. It reminds them, that's someone I want in my life. That's someone I can learn from now. Not just someone who raised me once, long ago. And here's something even more important to understand. When you ignore your kids to try and get their attention, it's still about them. When you stew in the silence, hoping they'll notice you're gone, you're still making them the center of your emotional world. That means they're in control of your peace, your happiness, your identity. And they may not even know they hold that power. But the moment you stop orbiting around their attention and begin pouring that energy into yourself, something incredible happens. You start building a life that doesn't need approval to feel fulfilling. You begin walking each day with purpose, not just routine. Maybe you reconnect with old friends. Maybe you volunteer somewhere that lights up your heart. Maybe you take up painting, or gardening, or walking every morning just to feel the sunrise on your skin. That life, where you're showing up for you, is the kind of life that radiates, that attracts, that commands respect, not through silence, but through strength. And here's the irony of it all. When you stop waiting for your kids to come around, and instead start living your life like it matters, they notice. Not because you're tugging at them, but because you've stopped doing that altogether. They notice the calm in your voice, the joy in your steps, the depth in your conversations. They may not say it right away, but something inside them shifts. And if they're ready, they will come back around. And if they're not, you'll still be okay. More than okay, actually. You'll be thriving. Because you will have reclaimed something most people forget as they get older. Your own power. Your worth is not tied to who calls you. It's not tied to family dinners, text messages, or how often your grandkids come visit. Those things are wonderful, but they are not your oxygen. You are allowed to be whole even if no one else sees it yet. You are allowed to be proud of who you are, even if they never say thank you. You are allowed to keep growing, even when the world around you goes quiet. And maybe, just maybe, by doing that, You become a living invitation, not through guilt, not through begging, but by being someone who is full of peace, not longing, full of life, not resentment, someone who loves without needing to be needed. That's the version of you they'll remember. That's the one they'll tell their kids about. The parent who didn't chase, who didn't punish, who didn't manipulate, but who chose grace over grievance, healing over silence, and purpose over waiting. So if your kids haven't reached out, don't reach inward to blame. Reach upward. Stretch into the space you were meant to fill, not as a parent waiting to be needed, but as a human being who still has so much to offer this world. Let today be the day you stop trying to be chased and start living in a way that draws people in without a word. Because the truth is, no one forgets the light. No one forgets someone who made them feel warm, welcome, safe, without asking for anything in return. And if you're that kind of person, even if your children don't come around the way you hoped, others will. New friends, neighbors, a community of people who recognize your wisdom and your heart. You are not alone, and you were never meant to fade quietly into the background. You were made to shine, especially now. If this message spoke to you today, I want to invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What have your relationships with your children been like in recent years? Have you ever gone silent hoping they'd come back? And how did that work out? I'd love to hear from you, and I know others will too. Because we grow stronger together. If this video helped you in any way, give it a like. It helps more people see messages like this. And if you'd like more thoughtful, honest conversations about living well after 60, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's a whole community here, and we'd love for you to be part of it. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're right on time, and you're more powerful than you know. Here's to living your truth, protecting your peace, and becoming the kind of person everyone, kids included, wants to come home to. No chasing needed.